Hey guys, you know not all landmarks stand the test of time? These once famous tourist attractions have captivated the world until disaster, decay, or demolition just wiped them from the map. Here are 15 famous tourist attractions that no longer exist. Number 15. The Pink and White Terraces of New Zealand. Before the rise of geothermal tourism at Rotorua or the modern glowworm caves of Waitomo, the most iconic natural attraction in New Zealand was the Pink and White Terraces, often called the eighth wonder of the natural world. These spectacular silica formations sat on the shores of Lake Rotomahana on New Zealand's North Island. They were created over thousands of years by geothermal activity, and they were formed by superheated water from boiling geysers cascading down a hillside. As the water cooled, it deposited white silica in terrace-like layers. These white terraces descended towards the lake in these delicate little icy folds, while pink terraces, colored by chemical elements like iron oxide, formed graceful steps that glowed rose gold in the sun. By the mid-19th century, the terraces had become the country's premier destination. European settlers and wealthy travelers from around the world came to bathe in the warm waters here, which were believed to have healing properties. Maori guides, particularly women like the famous guide Sophia Hinarangi, brought visitors across the lake and up to terraces, describing their cultural significance and overseeing the often dangerous journey. But on June 10, 1886, Mount Tarawera erupted with catastrophic force. The explosion was so violent it split the mountain in two, sending debris and lava raining down on the surrounding land. Villages were buried, dozens died, and the pink and white terraces, along with most of Lake Rotomahana, disappeared. For over a century, it was believed that the terraces had been completely destroyed. Recent studies and sonar mapping of the lake bed have revealed submerged portions of the terraces, indicating they may have survived in part beneath layers of volcanic debris. Still though, the original experience, the luminous mineral pools, the steaming terraces, and the lake setting, have been lost forever. Today, tourists can visit the buried village of Te Wairoa nearby, preserved in ash like Pompeii. But the pink and white terraces remain one of the most visually extraordinary natural attractions ever lost to geological violence. Number 14. The Original Crystal Palace, London. In 1851, London hosted the Great Exhibition, a grand event meant to showcase the achievements of the Industrial Revolution. To house it, architect Joseph Paxson designed the Crystal Palace, a huge iron glass structure in Hyde Park. The modular design here was revolutionary. Made of prefabricated cast iron and glass panels, the building could be quickly assembled and disassembled. It measured about 1,850 feet long and covered over 900,000 square feet. It was unlike anything the public had ever seen, a literal cathedral to progress and modernity. After the exhibition ended, the entire building was dismantled and rebuilt, larger and more elaborate in South London. It reopened in 1854 as a public exhibition hall and amusement venue, surrounded by landscaped gardens and fountains. The new site featured cultural exhibits, full-scale reconstructions of Egyptian tombs, and even Greek temples. The Crystal Palace became a symbol of Victorian innovation and pride, but its size and unique structure also made it vulnerable. In 1936, a fire broke out inside the building, fueled by the huge amounts of wood used in the floors and displays, and worsened by limited firefighting resources. The fire consumed the entire structure within hours. Residents of London could see the flames from miles away. The iron framework twisted in the heat, and the building that once represented the peak of industrial confidence collapsed into ruin. Despite some calls to rebuild it, though, the Crystal Palace was never reconstructed. The site remains a public park, and some remnants like statues and the dinosaur model still exist. Yet the original structure, a marvel of 19th century engineering, was lost forever in a single night, marking the end of an era in architectural history. Number 13. The Kowloon Walled City in Hong Kong. Hey, we've talked about this one before. For much of the 20th century, Kowloon Walled City was one of the most densely populated urban enclaves in the world. Located in Hong Kong, it began as a Chinese military fort during the Qing dynasty and later became an anomaly after Britain took control of the new territories in 1898. With neither side assuming clear administrative control, the area evolved into a de facto lawless zone. Over time, squatters moved in, and the original fort transformed into a 6.5-acre vertical city of chaos. By the 1950s, the walled city was packed with people and buildings, some as high as 14 stories, constructed so closely together that sunlight barely even reached the lower levels. There were no formal building codes here, no regulation of utilities, and very limited government oversight. More than 33,000 people were estimated to live there by the 1980s, giving it a population density of over 3 million people per square mile. That's one of the highest ever recorded. But despite its reputation for being a hub of crime, unlicensed medical clinics, and illegal factories, the walled city also operated as a self-contained and surprisingly functional ecosystem. Families lived in units stacked haphazardly on top of one another. Children played in narrow alleys called the hallways of darkness. Dentists, noodle makers, and barbers all ran successful businesses without permits or formal recognition. However, in 1987, after years of debate, the Hong Kong government decided to demolish it. It was seen as an embarrassment to a city that was modernizing rapidly in the run-up to the '97 handover to China. Residents were compensated and relocated, and in 1993, demolition began. Today, the Kowloon walled city no longer exists, replaced by a public park that includes historical markers and outlines of the original walls, yet the walled city remains an object of fascination. Its disappearance marked the end of one of the world's strangest and most unique urban experiments, an ungoverned community that survived for decades entirely outside the rules of any modern or public health or even governance. Number 12. The Old Penn Station. New York's original Pennsylvania station was once considered one of the greatest landmarks in the United States. Designed by McKim, Mead, and White and opened in 1910, the station covered 8 acres and featured a majestic Beaux Art facade modeled after Roman temples. Its enormous waiting room, 120 feet tall with a steel and glass roof, rivaled the European cathedrals and public monuments there. Penn Station wasn't just a train terminal, it was like a civic gateway. It welcomed millions to New York City with classical columns, sun-drenched concourses, and sweeping staircases. It symbolized the power of Pennsylvania Railroad and the ambitions of a growing metropolis. Yet by the mid-20th century, the ubiquity of rail travel had declined dramatically. The railroad, facing financial pressure and falling passenger numbers, saw the station as a costly burden. In 1963, the original Penn Station was demolished to make way for Madison Square Garden and a new, smaller underground station. This decision sparked national outrage. Though parts of the original station were relocated or buried beneath the new construction, the main features, the glass ceilings and grand arches and entryways, were lost forever. The demolition proved to be a turning point in U.S. architectural preservation. It spurred the creation of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission in 1965, which has since protected other key sites like Grand Central Terminal. But for many, the destruction of Penn Station remains a significant cultural loss in American urban history. What now exists in its place, a utilitarian underground hub beneath a sports arena, it's functional but uninspiring. Visitors have no sense they're walking through the site of a once great monument to urban design and travel. The old Penn Station is gone, but its absence has left a permanent imprint on how cities across the U.S. value and fight to protect their architectural heritage. Number 11. The Sutro Baths, San Francisco. Perched on the cliffs of the Pacific Ocean at San Francisco's Land's End, the Sutro Baths were once the largest indoor swimming facility in the world. Opened in 1896 by former San Francisco mayor and entrepreneur Adolph Sutro, these baths were an architectural symbol of late 19th century optimism. Constructed using steel, glass, and concrete, this complex featured 6 saltwater pools and 1 freshwater pool, each kept at different temperatures. The water was pumped in directly from the ocean during high tide and required an ingenious system capable of circulating over 1.5 million gallons of water in just an hour. The main building, nearly 500 feet long, had the pools beneath a massive glass roof, creating a greenhouse-like environment. In addition to these pools, the facility had slides, diving boards, and trapezes, and even a museum filled with global curiosities collected by Sutro himself. With a capacity for over 10,000 people, the baths also featured seating galleries for spectators, a concert hall, and even some cafes. They thrived for decades as a public space, especially for working-class families. However, maintaining such a complex structure proved costly. The rise of more modern entertainment options and suburban migration after World War II led to dwindling attendance. In 1966, developers planned to demolish the baths and replace them with high-rise apartments. But before demolition could proceed, disaster struck. A fire broke out during the early phases of demolition and quickly consumed the entire wooden interior. While arson was widely suspected, it was never officially confirmed. The building was destroyed and the apartment plans were abandoned. Today, the ruins of the baths are still visible. Concrete walls and rusted iron remnants cling to the edge of the Pacific. The site is now protected within the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and it serves as a reminder of a time when public architecture was built for scale, spectacle, and social access. Though it no longer exists in its full form, the Sutro baths remain a beloved part of San Francisco's coastal identity. Number 10. The Berlin Wall's Death Strip, Germany. While not a tourist attraction in the traditional sense, the Berlin Wall became one of the most visited and feared landmarks in Cold War Europe. Erected almost overnight in August of 1961, the wall physically and ideologically divided East and West Berlin. Over time, it evolved from a barbed wire barrier into a massive concrete fortification stretching over 96 miles, complete with watchtowers, floodlights, tank traps, and minefields. On the East Berlin side of the wall lay the so-called Death Strip, a wide barren zone filled with sand, anti-vehicle trenches, and automatic shooting devices. Guards were ordered to fire on anyone attempting to cross, yet this bleak, heavily militarized zone drew visitors from the west in large numbers. Observation platforms in West Berlin allowed tourists to peer into East Berlin and take photos of the wall and the grim no-man's land beyond. For many, visiting the Berlin Wall became a symbolic act, a way to witness firsthand the stark realities of Cold War geopolitics. Art and protest also became part of the wall's identity. The West Berlin side became a giant canvas, covered with graffiti, murals, slogans, and political statements, turning it into a living monument to a freedom of expression. In contrast, the East Berlin side was stark, gray, and untouched, heavily patrolled and sanitized. The wall stood for 28 years. Then, on November 9, 1989, in a stunning turn of events, East German authorities, facing mounting protests and political pressure, announced that the citizens could cross into West Berlin freely. Crowds surged to the checkpoints, and within hours people began chipping away at the wall with hammers and picks. The once feared barrier quickly became a festival of unity and remembrance. In the months that followed, most of the wall was dismantled. Today, only small sections remain, preserved as memorials or displays in museums. The Death Strip, once one of the most terrifying places in Europe, has been replaced by parks, bike trails, and urban renewal projects. As a tourist attraction, it no longer exists in its original form, but the impact of its presence and destruction continues to resonate. Number 9. The original MGM Grand Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. When the original MGM Grand Hotel and Casino opened in Las Vegas on December 5, 1973, it was the largest hotel in the world. Developed by famed Las Vegas casino magnate Kirk Kerkorian, the structure cost over $100 million and was billed as the most luxurious and theatrical resort the Strip had ever seen. With over 2,000 rooms, 2 enormous theaters, and a casino floor unlike any other at the time, the MGM Grand embodied the larger-than-life glamour that Las Vegas aimed to project. The hotel's facade mimicked a giant green emerald, evoking the studio's most famous film, The Wizard of Oz. In fact, the entire resort played into that theme with yellow brick road designs, fantasy-inspired interiors, and extravagant golden touches that connected the property directly to MGM's cinematic legacy. The Ziegfeld Room and Celebrity Room featured top performers like Dean Martin, Diana Ross, and Frank Sinatra. The property wasn't just a casino, it was like a self-contained entertainment complex. The rise of the MGM Grand coincided with a shift in Las Vegas's identity. In the early 1970s, the city was transitioning from its mob-controlled past towards a corporate-driven future. The MGM Grand was part of that new identity, cleaner, brighter, more family-friendly, and significantly more profitable. It attracted visitors from across the world, and it became a model for future mega-resorts that would define the city in the decades to come. But tragedy struck in the early morning hours of November 21, 1980. A fire broke out in a restaurant on the casino floor, and due to the building's flawed fire safety systems, it spread with devastating speed. The fire moved upward through the building's ventilation system and elevator shafts, creating toxic smoke that reached the hotel's upper floors. Though the flames were largely contained to the lower levels, the smoke caused the most deaths. In total, 85 people were killed, making it the deadliest disaster in Nevada's history and one of the deadliest high-rise fires in U.S. history. The fire exposed some serious issues in building safety regulations in Las Vegas. The MGM Grand had no fire sprinklers in large parts of the building, including the casino floor and restaurants. In the aftermath, building codes throughout Nevada and the U.S. were overhauled to require more rigorous fire safety measures, including sprinklers, smoke detectors, and improved exits. The MGM Grand was repaired and reopened 8 months later with major improvements in fire safety, but the property never fully recovered from the association with the disaster. In 1986, Cowoon sold the hotel to Bally's Entertainment, and the building was renamed Bally's Las Vegas. While the structure remained, the MGM Grand name was moved to a new location on the Strip, where a new, even larger MGM Grand opened in 1993, with over 5,000 rooms and a vastly different theme. For many, the loss is symbolic of a broader pattern in Las Vegas history: constant reinvention at the cost of preserving the past. The old MGM Grand was more than a hotel, it was a landmark of showbiz excess and, tragically, cautionary failure. Its disappearance from the city's visual landscape marks the loss of one of the most famous tourist attractions Las Vegas has ever known. Number 8. The Trolley System of Los Angeles. At one time, Los Angeles could claim the largest electric railway system in the world, known as the Pacific Electric Railway, or more popularly as the Red Cars. The trolley network crisscrossed Southern California with over 1,000 miles of track. From the early 1900s through to the 1940s, this huge system connected downtown Los Angeles to places like Santa Monica, Long Beach, Pasadena, and even as far as San Bernardino. For millions of Angelenos, the red trolleys were a vital part of everyday life. This network was originally developed by real estate tycoon Henry Huntington, who had a unique business model. He would build electric railway lines out to areas where he owned land, use the trolleys to bring people there, and sell the land for housing. The plan worked brilliantly. Communities sprang up all across Southern California in alignment with the red car lines. The system also offered scenic rides to beach resorts, mountain parks, making it both a practical tool and a form of leisurely transportation. The red cars were efficient, relatively cheap, and well-maintained. They moved huge numbers of people at a time when Los Angeles was still developing its identity as a metropolis. For a time, it seemed likely that LA would grow into a city based on rail-based public transportation, much like New York or Chicago. But by the 1950s, the system began to fall apart. A combination of factors led to its decline. The rise of the automobile industry was perhaps the most significant. With the post-World War II boom, car ownership skyrocketed, suburbs expanded, and the decentralized layout of LA made cars more convenient than fixed-route trains. Simultaneously, public funding and political will began to focus on building highways, not preserving rail lines. There is also the widely debated theory known as the General Motors streetcar conspiracy, which holds that automotive and oil companies intentionally sabotaged public transport by buying up trolley systems, shutting them down, and replacing them with buses. While the full extent of that influence is still debated among historians, what is clear is that the Pacific Electric system was systematically dismantled. By 1961, the last red car made its final run. What was once the largest interurban railway in the world vanished almost completely. Today, only a handful of red cars remain in museums, and the sprawling network of tracks was ripped up or buried beneath streets. Tourists who once rode from downtown to the beach for a few cents now face a city dominated by traffic, gridlock, and car dependency. The Pacific Electric Railway wasn't just a system, it was a cultural artifact and a vision of what LA might have become, a transit-oriented city with interconnected communities. In losing the red cars, the city lost more than just a tourist attraction. It lost a backbone that once held together its huge and growing shape. Moving on to number 7, the original Coney Island Luna Park, Brooklyn, New York. In the early 20th century, Coney Island was the undisputed capital of American amusement, and its crown jewel was Luna Park. Opened in 1903 by entrepreneurs Frederick Thompson and Elmer Skip Dundee, Luna Park wasn't just another fun fair, it was a spectacle of fantasy that would inspire amusement parks around the world for decades. The original park was built on the site of an earlier park called Sea Lion Park, and it quickly distinguished itself with an unprecedented combination of technology and design. At night, the park's towers, domes, and minarets lit up with over 250,000 electric lights, an amazing display in an age when many American homes still didn't have electricity. Visitors were dazzled before even entering the gate. Luna Park offered rides, slideshows, and immersive experiences designed to astonish you. There were gondola rides through Venetian canals, reenactments of disasters like the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, complete with fire and smoke, a simulated submarine ride, and a massive scenic railway that would wind through elaborately designed fake mountains and tunnels. One of the main attractions was A Trip to the Moon, a fantasy ride originally built for the 1901 Pan American Exposition. It took guests on an imaginary voyage via airship to the moon, where they walked through lunar landscapes and met fictional moon people. But Luna Park was more than just a collection of novelties. It was a cultural phenomenon. It welcomed over 90,000 people on opening day, and it quickly became a destination for families and tourists of every background. In an era of tight social norms, Luna Park offered escapism, excitement, and a shared urban experience unlike anything else in America. Unfortunately, its success didn't protect it from time and tragedy. In 1911, a massive fire tore through the park, destroying many of the iconic structures. Though it was rebuilt and reopened, it never really full gained its original magic. Competition from nearby Dreamland and Steeplechase Park, along with shifting tastes, gradually eroded its dominance. The Great Depression sapped its customer base, and a fire in 1944 delivered the final blow. The park closed permanently, and its once glittering towers were dismantled or destroyed. Today's version is modern and entertaining in its own right, but the fantastical architecture and theatrical spirit of the 1903 Luna Park are just gone. What once represented the cutting edge of amusement design is now documented only in photos, postcards, and the stories passed down through generations. For a brief moment in history, this park transformed a patch of Brooklyn beachfront into a luminous city of wonder, unlike anything else the world had seen. Number 6. The London White City. The term White City is today used to describe a neighborhood in West London, but its origins lie in one of the most ambitious tourist attractions the city ever hosted. In 1908, London prepared to host the Franco-British Exhibition and the Olympic Games. To commemorate these events, developers constructed an exhibition site in Shepherd's Bush, covering over 140 acres. The buildings were covered in white stucco and built in a neoclassic meets Moorish style, which gave rise to the name White City. This White City wasn't just an Olympic venue, it was a showcase of culture, empire, and spectacle. The exhibition alone attracted over 8 million people and featured lavish pavilions dedicated to different colonies, industries, and national achievements. There were also amusement rides, including a scenic railway and a toboggan slide, as well as full-size replicas of global landmarks. Buildings were temporary by design, but intended to impress. Towers, domes, and colonnades gleamed in white plaster, earning comparisons to the White City built for the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. Despite the temporary materials, though, the site had a strong impact on the identity of the area, and for years afterwards, the name White City stuck. One of the key venues built for the 1908 Olympics was the White City Stadium. This is an oval-shaped arena that could hold over 68,000 spectators. It was the most advanced stadium of its time. The modern 26.2-mile marathon distance was standardized here, with the race famously extended so it would finish in front of the Royal Box. Over the next few decades, the site hosted fairs and exhibitions, including the Anglo-American Exhibition in 1914 and the British Empire Exhibition in 1924, but as with many World Fair sites, the grandeur proved unsustainable. The white stucco buildings, never meant to last, began to deteriorate. Some were dismantled in the 20s and 30s, others simply fell into disrepair. By the 1960s, nearly all remnants of the original White City had vanished. The stadium remained in use for some time as a venue for speedway racing, but it too was eventually demolished in 1985. Today, little physical trace of the original White City even exists. Some street names and a few architectural nods remain, but the dazzling neoclassical white skyline that once dominated Shepherd's Bush is gone. It existed for only a few decades, yet for that brief period it served as the backdrop to Olympic glory. Its erasure is especially poignant because of the vision it once embodied. The White City was a fleeting glimpse of utopian design. It remains a symbol of London's past dreams and a striking example of how even monumental attractions can just vanish in time. Number 5. The Millennium Dome's original exhibition. When the clock struck midnight on January 1, 2000, the United Kingdom unveiled one of the most ambitious tourist attractions it had ever constructed, the Millennium Dome. Situated on the Greenwich Peninsula, besides the River Thames in southeast London, the structure itself was an architectural marvel with a diameter of over 365 meters and a height of more than 50 meters at its center. The dome could fit several football fields beneath its tent-like roof, and its design, 12 yellow masts representing the months of the year, a circular base for the calendar year, and placement of the prime meridian, was rich in symbolism. However, the attraction wasn't just the building, it was what was inside that captured the national imagination in the lead-up to the year 2000. The dome housed the Millennium Experience, a massive exhibition funded in part by the UK government and corporate sponsors. This was meant to be a celebration of British culture, technology, and the promise of a new era. The exhibition consisted of 14 theme zones, including body, work, faith, learning, and money, each filled with interactive displays and immersive art. The body zone, for example, was one of the most memorable. Visitors entered through the mouth of a giant human head and explored installations focused on the organs, senses, and systems of the body. The play zone featured climbing walls and giant slides, while talk examined communication through history and digital technology. Despite high expectations and enormous investment, estimated at over £800 million, the Millennium Experience quickly became a symbol of national disappointment. Attendance fell well short of the projected 12 million visitors, with fewer than 6.5 attending during its one-year run. Critics complained that the exhibits were confusing, overly abstract, or lacking in entertainment value. Technical issues too, overcrowding on opening day and a general sense of disorganization hurt its reputation. The British press, never shy about voicing displeasure, lambasted it as a wasteful vanity project. By December 31, 2000, the Millennium Experience shut its doors permanently. This huge interior was dismantled and the exhibits were auctioned off or destroyed. What had been envisioned as a lasting tourist destination on par with Disneyland Paris or Expo 2000 in Hanover vanished in a single year. The disappearance of the Millennium Experience shows a rare instance where a world-class venue failed not because of physical decline or disaster, but because of conceptual overreach. It was a tourist attraction that vanished due to lack of public connection. Though the shell remains, the exhibition inside, the centerpiece of Britain's Y2K celebration, no longer exists in any form, making it a brief and curious footnote in modern British history. Number 4. The Elephantine Colossus of Coney Island. In the latter half of the 19th century, way before Luna Park or Dreamland, one of Coney Island's most unusual and iconic attractions loomed over the Brooklyn shoreline, the Elephantine Colossus, also known simply as the Elephant Hotel. Opened in 1885, this 122-foot-tall building was shaped like a giant elephant and designed by James L. Lafferty, who patented the idea of an animal-shaped building. It was the first structure visitors arriving from Manhattan by ferry would see, and it became an instant sensation. Constructed with wood and tin sheeting over an iron frame, the elephant was modeled after an Asian elephant, with an ornate howdah or saddle tower on its back. Inside, it contained several floors of rooms, accessible via spiral staircases located in the elephant's hind legs. The attraction included a cigar store, a museum, an observation deck located in the howdah, and even guest rooms, making it one of the earliest examples of a novelty hotel. But over time, the attraction began to lose its shine. As the novelty wore off and new attractions like roller coasters and larger theme parks opened nearby, the Elephant Hotel struggled to remain profitable. By the 1890s, it had fallen into disrepair and it gained a rather notorious reputation. Rumors circulated that it was being used as a brothel, and by the early 20th century it had become a seedy and poorly maintained curiosity. In 1896, the building was abandoned after being deemed unsafe, yet it remained standing for several more years, slowly decaying by the beach. Finally, in 1896, it caught fire, believed to have started in the wooden interior and burned to the ground in a matter of hours. Given its proximity to the beach and lack of proper firefighting equipment, the blaze consumed the structure completely, leaving nothing behind but its stone foundation. Today, though, the Elephantine Colossus lives on only in postcards, sketches, and early photographs. It may seem absurd by today's standards, a hotel inside a giant elephant, but in its time it was one of the most talked about buildings in America. Although Lucy the Elephant, a similar but smaller structure built by the same architect, still survives in Margate, New Jersey, the Elephantine Colossus of Coney Island is long gone. Its brief, strange, and theatrical existence makes it one of the most famous tourist attractions in New York that no longer exists, and a symbol of over-the-top inventiveness that defined early American tourism. Number 3. The original Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. Before it became a globally recognized name for opulence and hospitality, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City existed in a very different form and location. The original hotel, built in 2 parts between 1893 and 1897, once stood on Fifth Avenue between 33rd and 34th, right where the Empire State Building now rises. It was not only a marvel of Gilded Age extravagance, but also a bold experiment that helped define the modern luxury hotel. The story of the original Waldorf Astoria began with feuding cousins. William Waldorf Astor built the first part, the Waldorf Hotel, in 1893. Just 4 years later, his cousin John Jacob Astor IV constructed the adjacent Astoria Hotel, and the 2 buildings were eventually connected by a 300-foot-long marble corridor called Peacock Alley. Despite the family rivalry, the union of the 2 structures created the largest and most luxurious hotel in the world at that time, offering over 1,000 rooms. It featured private bathrooms, still a rarity in the 1890s, telephone access in each room, ballrooms, and an extensive art collection. It became a symbol of wealth and refinement, regularly hosting U.S. presidents, foreign dignitaries, and high society. It also introduced the practice of allowing women to enter public dining areas without male escorts. That's an important social shift at the time. But as the 20th century progressed, Manhattan's commercial core began to shift northward. The once fashionable Fifth Avenue address fell out of favor, and by the late 1920s, the hotel's glory days were fading. In 1929, the building was sold and demolished to make way for what would become one of the world's most iconic skyscrapers, the Empire State Building. The demolition of the original Waldorf Astoria marked the end of an era. Its replacement by the Empire State Building became a symbolic of New York's shift from old-world elegance to modern corporate ambition. However, the Waldorf Astoria name lived on. A new, even grander version of the hotel opened in 1931 at 301 Park Avenue, where it still operates today, though the new building is very different in style and design. The loss of the original hotel isn't just the disappearance of a building, it's the erasure of a cultural institution that helped define luxury and innovation in the industry. Its demolition may have cleared the way for a new skyline, but it also closed the doors on one of New York's most lavish and influential landmarks. Number 2. The Imperial City Wall Gates, Beijing, China. In the early 20th century, Beijing was still a city defined by its ancient walls. These massive fortifications had protected the city for centuries, with origins dating back to the Yuan dynasty, that's about 1271 to 1368, and later expanded during the Ming dynasty. The inner wall, the most prominent of the defensive structures, stretched around what is now central Beijing, and included a dozen massive gates, each a masterpiece of traditional Chinese architecture. These gates, like the front gate, the Western Straight Gate, and the Eastern Straight Gate, were not merely openings in a wall, they were towering multi-tiered structures with watchtowers and intricate brickwork. Each gate served not only defensive purposes, but also a cultural function. Emperors passed through them in elaborate processions, and each was aligned carefully according to principles of Feng Shui and Confucian urban planning. By the early 1900s, the wall and its gates remained largely intact, giving Beijing the appearance of a medieval fortress city. However, as China entered the 20th century and began to modernize, these ancient defenses were increasingly seen as obstacles. Roads were being widened for cars, and rail lines needed to cut through the city. The walls and gates, once symbols of imperial authority and strength, were rebranded as outdated and irrelevant. The first major blow came in the 1950s under the new communist government. In a campaign to modernize Beijing and transform it into a functional capital for a socialist state, large sections of the interior city were demolished. Brick by brick, centuries of architectural heritage were torn down to make way for broad avenues, apartment blocks, and trolley lines. One of the most tragic losses was Zhengyangmen's Barbican, an elaborate outpost connected to the city's main southern gate, Qianmen. Though the main gate tower still survives, the surrounding structures were razed in the 1960s. And by the 1970s, the majority of the old city walls were gone. What remains today are only fragments. Some were later reconstructed, but these are replicas, not originals. The surviving sections of the wall, like the small stretch near the southeastern corner tower, are preserved as heritage sites. However, they give little sense of the grandeur that once defined the ancient city. Today, visitors can walk the modern boulevards where the walls once stood, unaware that beneath the asphalt and traffic lights once lay ceremonial paths guarded by massive stone portals. While Beijing remains a city of deep historical layers, the disappearance of the original Imperial city wall gates marks a rupture in its cultural continuity, a loss of one of the world's most striking urban monuments. Number 1. The original Notre Dame roof and spire. For over 850 years, the Notre Dame Cathedral stood as a symbol of Paris, its twin bell towers watching over the Seine River, its flying buttresses supporting centuries of weight and history, and its iconic spire soaring into the sky above the city. While the cathedral itself still stands, a defining part of this world-famous landmark no longer exists in its original form, the medieval-inspired roof and the central spire, both destroyed during the devastating fire of April 15, 2019. Notre Dame was begun in 1163 during the reign of King Louis VII and largely completed by the 14th century. It was a masterpiece of French Gothic architecture and a centerpiece of Catholic worship. But for much of its life, the cathedral's central spire, a familiar silhouette in skyline photos, wasn't even there. The original medieval spire was removed in 1786 due to instability, and for decades, the cathedral existed without one. It wasn't until the 19th century, during a wave of national pride and historic restoration, inspired in part by Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, that the architect Eugene Viollet-le-Duc was commissioned to oversee a massive renovation. Between 1844 and 1864, he added a new 93-meter spire, designed in faithful Gothic Revival style, which rose from the intersection of the nave and transept. It was surrounded by copper statues of the 12 apostles and an array of architectural details that paid tribute to medieval craftsmanship. The roof that supported the spire was just as remarkable. Known as the Forest, La Forêt, it was a wooden framework built from over 1,300 oak trees, some of which dated back to the 12th century. These massive timbers, many over 25 meters long, formed a lattice-work structure beneath the cathedral's lead-covered roof. For centuries, this wooden skeleton was hidden from view, but it played a vital role in the cathedral's structure and survival. It was an irreplaceable piece of medieval engineering and one of the oldest parts of the entire building. On the evening of April 15, 2019, a fire broke out in the attic beneath the roof. Despite swift emergency response, flames quickly engulfed the ancient wooden beams. Within hours, much of the roof was reduced to ash, and at 7:50 p.m. the central spire, once the beacon of Paris, buckled and collapsed in a fiery cascade. Miraculously, though, much of the main structure survived. The bell towers remained intact, the famed rose windows were largely spared, and many of the cathedral's priceless artifacts, like the Crown of Thorns, were rescued by firefighters and staff. However, the spire, the entire lead roof, and the forested timbers that had supported them for centuries were gone. In the aftermath of the fire, a massive fundraising effort was launched. By the end of 2019, nearly €1 billion had been pledged for restoration. French President Emmanuel Macron vowed to rebuild the cathedral even more beautifully, and debates began over whether to replicate the original spire or create a modern reinterpretation. Ultimately, it was decided to reconstruct the roof and spire exactly as they had been. Restoration has been underway for years, with plans to reopen the cathedral by December 2024. When it reopens, Notre Dame will once again have a roof and spire, but not the originals. These weren't just architectural components, but vessels of living history, crafted by hand, weathered by centuries, and admired by generations. Their loss reminds us that even the most revered landmarks are vulnerable, and that heritage, once lost, can never be fully reclaimed.